The wind tore down from the cliffs like it carried a grudge. It rattled the wooden shutters of Thomas Yazi's cabin and blew a fine layer of red dust through the gaps in the stone. He sat still at the small table, a tin mug of coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the fire. The hearth crackled softly, the only sound for miles. Out here near Lukachukai, quiet was more than silence, it was a way of living. And Thomas liked it that way. Quiet didn't lie. Quiet didn't break what little was left inside a man. Then came the knock. Not hard, not urgent, not even certain. 3 soft taps, barely louder than the wind, like someone wasn't sure they had the right to knock at all. Tomas's spine straightened. He didn't move right away. A knock at night wasn't a good thing. Out here, the only things that moved after dark were animals, spirits, or trouble. Slowly, he set the mug down. His fingers brushed the butt of the rifle propped near the door, not lifting it, just resting there. Listening. Another knock. Quieter now. He opened the door. The cold wind shoved its way in first, and behind it stood a woman wrapped in a battered traveling coat. Her face was pale beneath trail dust, lips, cracked eyes wide and rimmed red. She looked like a ghost who hadn't found peace. In her arms was a child, a girl maybe 4 or 5, wrapped in a thin quilt, her face flushed with fever. Her little fingers curled weakly against the woman's shoulder. No wagon, no horse, no light behind her. Just canyon darkness stretching out into forever. Please, the woman said, her voice barely louder than the wind. Just one night, in the barn. We won't be trouble. Tomas said nothing. His eyes moved past her, scanning the darkness. Nothing stirred, no second figure, no movement in the brush. You walked here, he asked. She nodded, her knees nearly buckling with the motion. The child whimpered. The woman steadied herself. Blood darkened, one boot dried and cracked. He looked at her, then really looked. Hands torn raw. Coat too thin. Breath coming in short puffs of pain. She wasn't asking. She was near the end of herself. The barn's no place for a child, he said finally. She stiffened, her voice breaking. We'll be gone before you wake. Just let her rest under cover. That's all I ask. Thomas stepped aside. Take the bed, the woman blinked. What inside, he said, gesturing past the hearth. There's a bed. It's warm. You and the girl can have it. We can't do that, she whispered. You can. His voice was firm, not unkind. I'll sleep by the fire. For a moment she didn't move. Then slowly she crossed the threshold like she expected the offer to vanish if she blinked. As she stepped into the light, Thomas saw how much of her face was bruised beneath the dirt. She sagged as the warmth reached her bones. He closed the door and bolted it. She hovered near the hearth, still holding the child. Her eyes darted, measuring the room the way someone does when they've had things taken from them. There's bread on the table, Thomas said, already ladling water into a kettle. Not much, but it's fresh enough. She looked at him like she didn't understand the language. Then, with a tremor in her voice, she asked why. He glanced at her. Why what? Why let us in? You don't know us. He poured water into the basin. Don't need to. The girl stirred again. The woman pulled back the quilt. The child's skin glistened with sweat, her cheeks too red. She's sick, Thomas said. Fever 3 days now. The woman didn't look up. No money, no doctor, we just kept walking. Thomas pulled a pot of stew from the hook over the fire. Sit. She lowered the child gently onto the bench and knelt in front of her. The girl moaned. The woman dipped a piece of bread into the broth and blew on it. Her first, she murmured. Thomas brought a second bowl and set it down. The child took a bite, then another. Her eyes fluttered shut. The woman ate slowly, each spoonful held like something sacred. Her fingers shook. Thomas watched her from his chair. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, warmth pulsed. Stillness returned, but now it was shared. She spoke again when the fire burned low. "We'll be gone by morning. I swear it." He stared into the flames. "Where are you headed?" She hesitated. "West." "That's a long walk." "We'll manage." "Not with a sick child, you won't," she said nothing. Her jaw clenched. Thomas didn't push. He knew that look. Some burdens didn't get shared even when they broke your back. He rose and pulled a wool blanket from the cupboard. "Bed's through there," he said, nodding toward the back. "You need rest. So does she." The woman gathered the child again. At the bedroom door, she paused. "Thank you," she said. Thomas nodded once. She stepped into the shadows and he heard the bed creak, the quilt shift. He sat back down, the rifle across his knees. He waited. The fire cracked. Outside, something shifted. Faint. A breath in the canyon. A boot against stone. He didn't move, didn't blink. It passed. But he didn't relax. Because out here, nothing often meant something. And whatever had driven that woman to knock on his door in the dead of night wasn't finished with her yet. Thomas added another log to the fire, bolted the door again, stared into the dark. He didn't know her name, didn't know the man she ran from. But he'd seen the fear in her eyes, the kind that sticks even when you've outrun it. His hand tightened around the rifle. He didn't sleep, and when the fire hissed low and the kettle began to whisper again, he thought about the girl's fever, about the bruise on the woman's cheek, about the way she didn't knock like someone asking for shelter. She knocked like someone asking for mercy. And he'd answered. Because someone had to. The wind had quieted by morning, but the silence it left behind was heavier than noise. Thomas stirred in the chair near the hearth, the rifle still across his lap, his neck stiff from sleep that had never quite settled. Pale light spilled through the eastern window, casting long bars across the floor. The fire had burned low, but enough coals remained to throw heat. The cabin held the scent of ash cedar and the stew from the night before. He listened first like he always did before moving. The faint crack of wood as the back room floor shifted, the soft rustle of fabric. No voices, no cries. He stood, worked the ache from his shoulders, and stepped toward the narrow hallway. The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar. Through the gap, he saw the woman still dressed in her tattered coat, sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to him, one hand resting on the child's forehead. She was whispering something, lips barely moving. Her other hand smoothed the girl's tangled hair. The child was asleep, face flushed, lips slightly parted. Thomas leaned against the doorframe. The woman looked up, startled at first, then simply tired. "She's burning up," she said quietly. Thomas nodded once. "Fever's worse, it's deeper now," she whispered. "Her breath sounds thick. It wasn't like that yesterday." He stepped back into the main room and returned with a cloth and a basin of fresh water. When he handed them to her, their fingers touched hers, ice cold. He poured a cup of coffee, sat on the edge of his chair, and watched the flames eat through the last of the kindling. Out here, sickness didn't ask who you were. It only asked whether you were alone. The woman didn't answer. She dipped the cloth into the water, wrung it out, and laid it across the girl's forehead. The child stirred, but didn't wake. Her tiny fingers twitched. "She's my whole world," the woman said suddenly. "My name's Sarah. Sarah Willow. Her name's Leia." Thomas set the cup down and nodded. "Thomas Yazzie." "Thank you for letting us stay," she added. "I didn't think anyone would answer, not way out here." You're lucky I keep the door bolted and not barred. A flicker of something, maybe humor, maybe exhaustion, passed through her expression. Sarah brushed Leia's cheek, eyes brimming but dry. I didn't know where else to go. Thomas stood again and moved toward a small cabinet near the window. He reached behind a stack of folded linens and drew out a bundle of dried herbs leaves, crumbled and brown, but still potent. Juniper bark and rabbit tobacco, he said. Won't stop a deep fever, but might ease the lungs a little. Sarah took it with reverence, as if he'd handed her gold. He set a pot to boil and crushed the herbs into a tin cup. The scent filled the room, sharp, earthy old. When the water boiled, he poured it over the leaves and stirred with the back of a spoon. Let it steep, he said. Then strain it. Small sips. Sarah nodded, her voice gone. He pulled on his coat and stepped out into the cold morning. The ground was firm underfoot, the sky washed in soft pink. He moved around the house, checked the edges for tracks. Nothing new. No sign of movement in the distance. Still, he didn't like the feeling growing in his gut. Inside again, he found Sarah had moved Leia into a more upright position and was coaxing her lips open for a sip of tea. The child whimpered, but took a few drops. Tomas crouched beside the hearth and added more wood to the fire. The warmth rose fast now, pressing back the chill that crept through the stones. She's holding it down, Sarah said. That's something. It is. They sat in silence again, the fire crackling between them. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door, she said after a while. Don't worry about that yet. I should have just kept going. With a sick child, you wouldn't have made it another mile. Sarah's eyes lowered. She wrapped her arms around herself. I told myself we'd make it to the next town. Maybe someone there would help. There's no town closer than Chinle. That's 3 days on foot. Her breath caught. I didn't know. You do now. Leia coughed a dry, wheezing sound, and Sarah immediately reached for the cloth again. She dipped it in the cool basin, brushed it across the girl's neck. Tomas watched her movements. Tender. Desperate. You've been walking long, he asked. She hesitated. 3 days. Maybe 4. I lost track when the sky started to blur. We walked nights, mostly. Hid during the day. He nodded, not pressing. I thought the fever was just from the cold at first. She continued. Then she stopped talking. Tomas stood and walked to the small wooden chest beside the window. He opened it, pulled out a leather pouch. Inside were a few pinches of dried cornmeal, some prayer feathers, a bit of crushed turquoise. He tied the pouch shut and handed it to her. For her, he said. From my aunt. She says it helps. Sarah's hands shook as she took it. Your Aunt Naomi Begay. She's medicine trained, lives past the northern ridge. Would she come here? She might. I'll go ask. No, I mean, I don't want to cause more trouble. You're not. He pulled on his coat again. I'll be back by midday. Keep the fire going, and keep her warm even if she sweats. Sarah stood slowly. Thank you. Thomas opened the door, stepped out into the rising sun. The canyon felt different now. He couldn't name it exactly, but the air seemed to press harder against his skin. As he walked toward his horse, tethered behind the barn, he glanced back at the cabin, saw smoke rising steady from the chimney, saw a child's quilt flung over the porch rail to dry. He mounted up, spurred the horse gently, and rode out. He needed Naomi's herbs, and her eyes. Because something about this wasn't just a fever. It was the way the girl's breath sounded. The way Sarah flinched at sudden noise. The way she never turned her back to the window. Tomas knew danger when it walked quiet. He rode harder. The wind had picked up again. and somewhere beyond the ridge danger was watching. The knock was still in her ears. Even as Sarah crouched beside the hearth, feeding wood into the fire with trembling fingers, she kept glancing at the door, like she expected someone to burst through. Leah lay on the bed in the other room, wrapped in fresh quilts. Her fever had not broken, but her breaths were slower now, steadier touched with less strain than before. The medicine Thomas left behind had done something. Maybe not enough, but something. The cabin creaked with wind and time. The smell of herbs clung to the walls. Sarah stared at the fire, remembering the last time she had felt warmth. Not just heat, but warmth, the kind that came without fear following behind it. She didn't even know this man Thomas Yazzie, yet here she was, sheltered, fed, her child given care. No questions, no expectations. But she knew that peace, however soft, however fleeting, was borrowed time. When Leah stirred, Sarah moved to the doorway. The girl's eyes opened just a sliver. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. Sarah leaned closer. Water. Sarah helped her sip from a cup, then brushed the damp hair from her forehead. Leah's eyes fluttered shut again. Outside, hooves cracked faintly against frozen dirt. Sarah stiffened. She moved to the window slowly, heart pounding in her chest. But the sound didn't return. Just the wind again, sighing through the canyon. She returned to the fire, sat on the stool Thomas had left for her, and held the cup tight in both hands. The warmth seeped into her fingers, but it couldn't reach her core. She wasn't sure what Tomas would say when he came back. Maybe he'd want answers. Maybe he'd change his mind. Part of her wanted him to ask, just once, so she could tell the truth and finally stop hiding it. The door creaked open mid-afternoon. Thomas stepped inside, a dusting of red powder on his coat, his expression unreadable. Naomi Begay followed him. Sarah straightened, instantly wary. The older woman moved with quiet command. Her long gray braids were wrapped in soft cloth, her face lined like the canyons, her hands, sure as they moved, to set down her satchel. "Where is the child?" Naomi asked. Sarah led her to the back room. Naomi touched Leah's forehead, her wrists the base of her neck. She murmured things Sarah didn't understand, words from another language, words that felt like earth and sky. "She's weak, but she's not breaking," Naomi said. "With rest, she will stay. She means the fever won't take her," Thomas clarified gently from behind. Sarah's throat closed. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands curled in her lap. Naomi straightened. "What took you out here, girl?" Sarah hesitated. Thomas stepped forward. "She doesn't have to, I do." Sarah interrupted. "I have to." Naomi waited. Sarah looked down at her hands, at the thin scars wrapped around her wrists like old vines. She traced one with her thumb. "His name is Wade Tanner," she said softly. "He was my husband." Thomas's eyes narrowed. Naomi didn't flinch. "He owns land," Sarah continued. "Cattle. He buys men who wear badges, buys silence too, and fear. I tried to leave once Leah wasn't even walking yet. He found us in 2 days. Took me back, told me next time he'd take her instead." Thomas exhaled through his nose. "I stayed after that. 2 more years. He didn't just hurt me. He broke things in ways you don't see until you try to run again." She paused. Her voice cracked. "But when Leah started waking up at night crying from dreams she couldn't name, I knew I'd waited too long already. So I ran again. I took what I could carry and started walking west. I thought if I got far enough fast enough, he wouldn't find us this time." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He always finds us." There was a long silence. Naomi stepped closer and reached out not to scold or pity, but to take Sarah's hand. You ran for your child. That's not weakness. That's the shape of strength. Thomas moved toward the hearth, his back to the room. His fingers gripped the edge of the mantel. Sarah swallowed the knot in her throat. Thank you, she whispered. Naomi packed up slowly. She'll need days of rest, maybe longer. That tea, give it every few hours. Cool rags. Let her sleep. Let her dream. Sarah walked her to the door. Naomi paused before leaving. Her gaze was sharp. If he finds his way here, he'll meet stone before he meets mercy. You understand, Sarah nodded. Naomi touched her shoulder and left without another word. Tomas sat back down at the table, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. Sarah joined him. I don't know what to say, she murmured. You said it. I didn't mean to bring this to your door. You didn't. They sat in the warmth, the silence no longer filled with fear, but with something heavier. Why help us? She asked. Tomas sipped his coffee, his eyes fixed on the flames. I've known what it is to lose someone when you weren't there to stop it. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The wind scratched at the door again. Thomas looked up sharply. He crossed to the window, lifted the curtain just a few inches. Nothing. But his body remained tense like a bow notched and drawn. Sarah rose. What is it? He didn't answer. He opened the door, stepped outside. She followed a step behind, holding the quilt close around her. They both saw it at the same time. A single boot print in the patch of red dust beside the water barrel. New. Deep. Thomas crouched beside it. Not mine, not yours, not hers. Sarah's blood turned cold. He looked out toward the ridge. No horse tracks. Whoever it was came on foot, scouting, Sarah whispered. Thomas rose slowly. Someone's looking, he said. And the sky, so soft an hour ago now, seemed hard and watching. The canyon wind changed direction before noon. It blew harder from the north, now colder, sharper. Thomas stood at the top of a bluff behind his cabin, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. The ground was dry, the sky the color of worn-out denim, and somewhere below the wind carried with it a smell he didn't like. Sweat, old leather, something faint and out of place. He scanned the land. To the west, hills rose in slow waves, each ridge stacked behind the next, like layers of rusted armor. To the east, the dry riverbed wound through a grove of cottonwoods before disappearing toward the open basin. No movement, no dust trail, no glint of steel. But something was out there. He turned his horse east and followed the edge of the bluff down into the trees. Hoofbeats muffled by sand branches whispering overhead, he let the reins slacken and leaned forward, letting instinct guide him. 20 minutes in, he found what he was looking for, a broken stem snapped low near the base, too clean to be wind or deer. He dismounted, crouched, pressed a hand into the dirt beside it. A boot had stepped there. Not his. He didn't speak, just stood, brushed his hand on his jeans, and swung back into the saddle. At the far side of the riverbed, near a twisted juniper, a small pile of ashes lay cold among scattered coals. Fresh, less than 12 hours old. He turned toward the northern ridge. Benji Nez would know what else had passed this way. By the time Thomas reached the rise where Benji often kept watch, the sun had begun to slide behind the canyon wall. He whistled once, sharp and low. Moments later, Benji emerged from a rock outcrop rifle slung over one shoulder, a strip of jerky hanging from his mouth. Didn't expect to see you up here, Benji said, chewing. Thought you were retired from people. I was. Benji raised a brow. Trouble, maybe. Thomas dismounted. Need your eyes. Benji tilted his head. Whose trail someone came through my place last night. On foot, left a print, circled the barn. Didn't knock. Benji spit the jerky into his hand, tucked it in his coat. Scouting, exactly. Benji scratched the back of his neck. How many can't say yet? One, maybe two. Quiet. You want me to watch the ridge, watch it. But don't fire unless they fire first. Benji nodded. You bringing in Naomi again? Not yet. She already knows something's off. Benji shifted, rubbing his jaw. The woman and her kid Thomas nodded once. They the reason someone's sniffing your doorstep? Yes. Benji looked off toward the horizon. People like that don't come this far just to make noise. They come to make things disappear. Thomas didn't answer. Benji turned to him, eyes dark and knowing. Men who mean no harm don't ride like they own the sky. Thomas let the words settle. You think it's Wade Tanner? Benji asked. Likely. I heard of him. Doesn't travel light. Thomas adjusted his reins. Then I'll need to be heavier. They parted at the base of the slope. Benji headed north with his rifle ready and ears wide. Thomas rode hard back toward the cabin, the cold wind burning his cheeks. When he returned, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The sky was inked in crimson and ash. Smoke rose from his chimney, and for a moment the sight of it felt like hope. Inside, Sarah was by the hearth, feeding small spoonfuls of broth to Leia, who now sat upright, her eyes clearer but still rimmed in fatigue. The girl blinked at Thomas when he stepped inside, then leaned against her mother's arm. She kept it down, Sarah said. All day. No fever spike. Thomas nodded. That's good. You found something out there, she said. He set his hat down and leaned the rifle against the wall. Ashes in the junipers. Tracks near the riverbed. I went to find Benji. Benji A. Tracker. Good one. Sharp ears, sharper eyes. Sarah pressed her lips together. How long do you think we have? I don't know yet. She looked down at Leia, whose small fingers clutched the edge of the blanket like it might fly away. If they come, we'll handle it. She shook her head. You don't know what he's capable of. Tomas crouched beside the fire, the heat washing over his tired bones. I don't have to know him to see what he left behind. Sarah's voice caught. He's not like other men. Tomas stirred the coals. Good. I'm not either. They ate in near silence. Tomas kept his back to the door, ears tuned to every creak of wood, every gust of wind. Later, after Leia had fallen asleep again, Sarah poured hot water into a basin and washed the dirt from her hands. Why did you come out here? She asked. Thomas didn't look at her. Because I've buried more than I've saved. I thought quiet would keep me from having to choose again. Sarah moved closer. But you let us in anyway. He met her gaze. I don't walk away from things that knock. Outside, a coyote called its cry, thin and high across the canyon. Thomas moved to the window, lifted the edge of the curtain just enough to peer outside. The moon hadn't risen yet. Only stars lit the land. He stared toward the ridge. Somewhere out there, someone had circled his barn without a word. Someone who hadn't come to ask. Someone who didn't leave tracks to make a mistake. The fire behind him popped once, and Sarah jumped. Thomas set his hand on the rifle. Not fear, reflex. He watched the dark, watched the line where sky met rock, and in his chest something settled. They were coming. Not yet. But soon. And when they did, it wouldn't be a question. It would be an answer. One written in the weight of bootsteps and the creak of leather. He turned from the window, looked back at the woman and child behind him. He'd known danger before. But this time it had a name, and it was getting closer. The riders came just after sunrise, slow and wide across the basin, like they had all the time in the world. Tomas spotted them first, 3 shadows breaking over the far ridge, too straight to be wild horses, too quiet to be a passing trail crew. He stood beside the barn, his hands stained with oil from tightening the latch on the upper door. The sun flared behind the riders, turning them into dark outlines that flickered between dust and morning light. He didn't call out. Just walked back toward the cabin, calm and steady, boots crunching over frozen dirt. Sarah met him at the door, Leia pressed to her hip. Tomas nodded toward the ridge. "They're here." Her face paled. Leia curled tighter into her arms. Inside, Thomas moved to the rifle by the window and checked the cylinder with slow, practiced hands. His expression didn't change. Neither did the rhythm of his breath. Sarah placed Leia on the bed, kissed her forehead, and wrapped her in the quilt. Her movements were gentle, but her hands trembled. "Do we run no time?" Thomas said. "They'll be here before the canyon narrows." Sarah stood at the window and looked out. The riders were closer now, clear in shape. The one in front sat tall, wide-shouldered, a face she hadn't seen in nearly a year but would never forget. Wade Tanner. Her stomach twisted into ice. The other two were rough men she recognized but couldn't name. One rode with his right hand always near his hip, his eyes scanning like a dog sniffing a scent. The other leaned heavy in his saddle, chewing a blade of something, his jaw slack but his eyes hard. Wade didn't raise his hand, didn't call out. He just kept riding straight and sure as if he owned the dirt beneath him. Thomas stepped out the front door before they reached the fence. He stood tall, rifle slung but ready, feet planted. Sarah stayed just inside, watching through the crack between the boards. The riders stopped 10 paces beyond the cabin. Wade dismounted, with the same ease she remembered from their old life, casual like violence was a second skin. He dusted his coat, looked over the house, and fixed his eyes on Thomas. "You in there?" he called. "I'm looking for my wife and daughter." Thomas didn't answer. Wade stepped forward, arms slightly raised in mock diplomacy. "I know they came this way. Saw the tracks myself. We don't need trouble. Just send them out and we'll leave peaceful." Still, Thomas didn't speak. Wade's smile twitched. "You hear me?" The man on his right shifted in the saddle hand, drifting toward the butt of his pistol. Wade raised a hand, stopping him. "Listen," he continued, voice softening to something almost reasonable. "I don't know what she told you. Women get scared. They say things. But she's my wife. That girl's my blood. I've got a right to them." Thomas stepped forward now, slow and unblinking, the rifle resting across his chest. "You've got no rights here." The words hung heavy in the morning air. Wade narrowed his eyes. "That's so you know who I am, don't care." Behind the fence, the man chewing the blade of grass chuckled. Wade didn't. "My name's Wade Tanner. Maybe you've heard it." "No, you will." Thomas's voice was steady. "They're not going anywhere." The rider on the left shifted again. "Hell, Jack, let's just shut up." Jeb Wade snapped without looking. He stepped forward again, boots crunching frost. "You're making a mistake, friend. I'm not your friend." Wade's voice lost all its calm. "You're gonna regret standing between me and my family." Thomas raised the rifle a little higher, not quite aiming yet, but not far off. "If you come back?" "He said you won't leave." Wade's jaw clenched. "You threatening me, I'm telling you what happens." For a moment, no one moved. The wind shifted. A hawk cried somewhere in the cliffs above. Then Wade smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "All right," he said. "All right, we'll go." He turned as if to leave, then paused. "But you remember this, whatever happens next, it's on you." He mounted up. The others followed. They rode off slow, deliberately, never looking back. Tomas waited until the dust had fully settled before lowering the rifle. Sarah stepped outside, arms wrapped tight across her chest. "He'll come back," she whispered. "I know. We should have run. And gone where you collapse out there, he finds you anyway." She said nothing, just stood there, eyes burning from more than cold. Inside, Leia had crawled from the bed and was standing near the hearth, clutching her toy horse. Sarah knelt, gathered her daughter into her arms, and kissed the top of her head. "I'm sorry, baby," she murmured. "I'm so sorry." Tomas returned the rifle to the peg by the door, then began stacking wood near the fireplace. "We need to be ready," he said. "If he comes back, it'll be soon, and next time he won't talk first." Sarah looked up at him, her face pale but set with a quiet determination. "What do we do?" Thomas didn't flinch. "We make sure he regrets it." The flames popped. Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping dry leaves into swirling eddies near the fence. Wade Tanner had left, but only for now. And when he returned, it wouldn't be to ask. It would be to take. And Thomas Yazzie had already made peace with what he'd have to do to stop him. The air inside the cabin felt tight, like it was holding its breath. Sarah stood in front of the door, arms crossed over her chest, eyes unfocused. She hadn't moved since Wade and his men rode off. Her fingers twitched now and then, an old habit Thomas recognized as muscle memory from someone who'd had to stay still for too long in the presence of danger. He was at the table cleaning the rifle again, even though it didn't need it. "You should eat something," he said. She didn't answer. Thomas didn't repeat himself. Instead, he set the rifle aside, stood, and went to the narrow cupboard behind the stove. He pulled out a small wooden box, opened it, and took out a short-barreled revolver. The handle was worn smooth, the cylinder scratched from years of use. It wasn't beautiful, but it worked. He set it on the table in front of her. Sarah blinked. "What's this, you ever used one?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "Years ago. Before him. Then it'll come back." She stared at the weapon, then at him. "I thought you didn't want me in the middle of this." Thomas looked straight at her. "You're already in it." She didn't reach for the gun. Not yet. Thomas moved to the hearth and knelt beside Leia, who was sitting on a blanket, tracing lines in the ash with the toy horse he'd carved. Her fever had broken for good the night before, and though she was still pale, her eyes were brighter. He tousled her hair gently. "You hungry, little one?" She nodded, then looked up at her mother. "Mama, too." That finally broke something. Sarah sat down, pulled her daughter into her lap, and held her close. She didn't cry. She just held. After breakfast, Thomas led her outside. The morning was crisp. Ice rimmed the edges of the water barrel. Farther off, ravens called in the canyon, their voices sharp. Thomas walked to a fallen log behind the barn, picked up 3 empty cans, and lined them on a rail fence. Then he handed her the revolver. Sarah stared at it again, the same way she had inside. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. "But it's better than waiting with your hands empty." She took it. Her fingers curled around the grip like they remembered something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Thomas stepped back. "Go on." The first shot missed wide. The second was closer. The third clipped the edge of a can, sending it tumbling. By the 6th, she hit one square. She lowered the revolver and exhaled like she hadn't in days. Thomas nodded. "Not bad." I shook. "You still hit." She handed the gun back. "He won't care if I can shoot. He'll care if you don't." They stood in silence, the weight of everything stretching between them. "Do you think he'll bring more men?" she asked. "Probably. Lawmen, maybe. But law's not what keeps men like him strong. It's fear." Sarah stared off toward the ridge where the sun had begun climbing higher. I'm tired of being afraid. Tomas looked at her long and quiet. If he comes back, she said, I won't be hiding anymore. That afternoon, Tomas rode out to check the trail near the riverbed again. The ash pile was gone, kicked over and scattered, but there were more tracks now, deeper, heavier. Horses, 2, maybe 3, passing through just before dawn. He crouched, low fingers, brushing the disturbed soil. The men had looped around the cabin wide enough to avoid being seen close enough to see the windows. He didn't like the message in that. When he returned to the cabin, Sarah was outside with Leah hanging wet linens on the line. Leah held a clothespin in each hand, giggling at the wind that tried to snatch the sheets away. For a heartbeat, Thomas allowed himself the sound of it. A child's laughter. It filled the space in his chest like something long lost and newly found. Sarah saw the look on his face and the way his jaw tightened after. She stepped away from the line and met him halfway across the yard. Was he there? No, Thomas said. But his boots were. He told her what he saw, how close they'd come, how quiet they'd stayed. We need another set of eyes, he said. I'll send Benji to the rim. If they circle back, he'll see them. She nodded, but the color had drained from her face. He placed a hand on her shoulder. They're not getting past me. I'm not worried about me. I am. Inside, as dusk fell, Sarah loaded the revolver without needing instruction. Her movements had steadied. She checked the chamber, latched it shut, and slipped it into her coat pocket. Leah fell asleep early, curled up near the hearth again. Tomas and Sarah sat at the table, mugs of weak coffee between them, firelight dancing along the walls. You ever have a family? She asked. Tomas didn't answer right away. Once. What happened, Fire? Long time ago. Sarah's voice softened. Wife and a son. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Just a moment. A brief, quiet link in the dark. He didn't pull away. The wind picked up again outside. This time it didn't feel sharp, it felt deliberate. Like it carried something behind it. Sarah stood, checked the lock on the door, and sat back down with her back to the wall. Thomas noticed. She met his eyes. If it's coming, I want to see it when it does. Thomas nodded. He stirred the fire, added a log. They waited. And while the house held silence, the land around them did not. Beyond the dark hills, something was moving. Planning. And in the canyon, not far from where the cabin sat, 3 riders paused beneath a ledge. One of them pointed toward a narrow ridge trail leading west, another toward the barn down below. The third only smiled, because they knew the shape of the land now, and they knew the weight of fear. They had every intention of making it heavier. The land went quiet the way it does right before blood. Tomas felt it before he saw them. A stillness settled across the canyon that didn't belong to the wind or the cold. Birds had vanished. No calls, no rustle of wings. Even the ravens had gone silent. He stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning the basin. Sarah was inside with Leah, teaching her how to tie a strip of dried corn husk into the shape of a doll. The girl's small hands fumbled, laughing quietly, unaware. Thomas wanted to keep it that way. Dust rose in the east. He narrowed his gaze. 5 riders this time. Wade Tanner was in front, just as before, but now he came with confidence that reeked of certainty. Flanked by Jeb on one side, a short, narrow-eyed man on the other, and 2 more trailing faces, unfamiliar, but posture unmistakable. The kind of men who didn't ask questions before reaching for their guns. Thomas turned and stepped back inside. They're coming, he said. Sarah rose instantly. She didn't ask who. She knew. Her eyes went to the rifle near the hearth, then to the revolver she'd placed beside the bread knife on the table. She grabbed it and holstered it under her coat. Leia looked up, sensing the shift. Mama Sarah crouched. "You remember what we practiced?" The girl nodded. "Go to the back room. Hide. Don't move unless you or Mr. Thomas say." "That's right, baby. No matter what you hear." Leia's lower lip quivered, but she nodded again and hurried down the hall. Thomas tossed Sarah a small pouch. "Put this in her pocket. It's from Naomi. Corn pollen and cedar bark." She took it, her hands steady now, and vanished down the hallway. When she returned, her coat was buttoned, and the steel in her eyes had settled into place. Tomas opened the front door and stepped out. The 5 riders stopped just before the fence line, forming a slow arc. Wade dismounted first, boots hitting the dirt with deliberate weight. "Didn't expect me back so soon, did you?" he called, smiling. "Hoped you'd show more sense," Thomas replied. Wade's smile thinned. "You got my wife and child locked up in there, and you're talking to me about sense. They're not locked up, and they're not leaving." "See, that's where you're wrong." Wade took a step forward. "I gave you a chance. Told you to walk away. But you didn't. So now we do it the hard way." Thomas raised the rifle slightly, not aimed yet, just a clear warning. "You draw on me," he said. "You better be ready to die." One of the men on horseback, young, maybe 20, let out a nervous laugh. "Hell, Jack," he started. "That's right," Wade cut in, voice louder now. "Just one man. You think you're gonna stand against all of us, old-timer?" Thomas didn't answer. Wade turned his head slightly, still watching Thomas. "Jeb, you and Marcus circle behind. Ellis Cole, check the side. No one goes in or out." The men started moving. Thomas shifted the rifle just enough to level it at Wade's chest. "You take another step, I drop him first," Thomas said, voice like gravel and iron. "Then I take as many of you as I can before you get me. Question is, who wants to die second?" The riders froze. Jeb looked to Wade, then back at Thomas. His hand hovered near his gun. "You're bluffing," Wade said, eyes narrowing. "Try me." Behind Thomas, the cabin door creaked open. Sarah stepped out, both hands on the revolver, arms extended. She pointed it at Wade without shaking. "He's not bluffing." Thomas didn't turn. He didn't need to. Wade's head tilted slightly, surprise flashing across his face before something colder replaced it. "Claire," he said, voice syrup thick with mock sweetness. "Put that down. You're going to hurt yourself. Stay back, Wade. You're being foolish. Come on, bring Anna. Let's go home. We'll forget all this happened." "I'm not going back," his tone hardened. "Yes, you are. You're my wife. Anna's my daughter. You don't get to just leave. I already did." Wade's jaw tensed. "You think this man can protect you? He doesn't give a damn about you. He's just using you. You're wrong. He's shown me more kindness in 2 days than you did in 5 years. Wade's lip curled. "Ungrateful enough," Thomas snapped. "You've got your answer. Now leave." Wade turned his head slowly, eyes cutting toward each of his men. Cole shifted in his saddle, unsure. Ellis swallowed hard. "You come back here again," Thomas said. "You won't leave." Wade's hand moved. Fast, but not fast enough. The crack of Thomas's rifle echoed like thunder through the canyon. Wade staggered, hand dropping the revolver he hadn't fully drawn. Blood bloomed across his chest. His mouth opened, eyes wide in disbelief. He fell to his knees, then forward, face first in the dirt. The others sat frozen, staring at their leader's body. Thomas chambered another round. "Anyone else?" Jeb raised both hands slowly. "No, sir. We're done." "Then ride out." They didn't wait. Horses turned, sharp hooves tearing up the earth as they fled the basin and disappeared behind the ridge. Thomas lowered the rifle. Behind him, Sarah stood still, the revolver still raised, her breath coming fast. He turned to her. It's over. She looked at him, at Wade's body, and the gun slipped from her hands. Her knees gave out. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground. She didn't speak. She just buried her face into his shoulder and wept. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself hold something that needed holding. The fire behind them crackled to life again, but outside the land stayed quiet. No birds, no wind, just a silence heavy with everything it had taken to win it. The earth opened wide for Wade Tanner. Thomas dug into the ridge just after dawn, up past the second bend, where the wind shifted direction and the juniper trees grew twisted and sparse. He chose the spot not for the man, but for the silence it offered. No one would pass there. No one would see the marker if there was one. Sarah hadn't asked for a cross. She hadn't asked for anything. He buried Wade without ceremony. No prayers, no final words. Just dirt over flesh and blood that would never trouble the living again. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't hatred either. Just a job that needed doing. When he finished, he stood for a long time looking out over the canyon, the morning wind tugging at his coat, the sky wide and merciless. On his way back, he stopped by Naomi's shelter, a shadowed crack in the rock beneath a stone archway, part home, part shrine. She was outside, kneeling in the frost, her hands moving over a small fire in a bowl carved from sandstone. Cedar smoke curled in lazy loops above her, and she didn't look up when he approached. "He's dead," Thomas said. "I felt it," Naomi replied, her voice low and even. "Felt it in the ground. I buried him far from the cabin, as it should be." Thomas sat beside her on a flat stone. His bones ached from the digging, from the shooting, from everything that came before. He wasn't the kind of man who stayed gone, he muttered. "No," she agreed. "But now he's gone for good." Naomi dropped a pinch of blue cornmeal into the fire. It sparked and hissed. "I came for cleansing," Thomas said after a long pause. She turned to him, then her eyes dark and full of something deeper than sympathy. "For yourself, for the land," he said. "For them." She nodded, then reached into her basket and handed him a bundle sage-crushed yucca-dried flowers. "You'll burn this in all four corners. Smoke will carry the prayers. It won't forget what happened, but it'll keep the memory from curdling." Thomas took the bundle. As he rose, she put a hand on his arm. "And what about you, Thomas Yazzie? Do you seek forgetting?" "No," he said. "I seek peace." Naomi smiled, small and sad. "Then you're already halfway there." He returned to the cabin before noon. Leah was sitting near the fire, cradling the corn-husk doll Sarah had helped her make, the toy horse still tucked beside it. She looked up when he entered and smiled. "You're back." "I am." Sarah stood from the table. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her shoulders sat square again. "We're far enough." She nodded. "Thank you." He handed her the bundle Naomi had given him. "For the house." Sarah took it gently, like it might crack if she held it wrong. That afternoon, they performed the cleansing together. Sarah lit the sage in a small ceramic dish. Thomas walked to each corner of the cabin, northeast, south, and west, carrying the smoke, whispering old prayers he hadn't spoken in years. Leah watched from her stool, silent, wide-eyed. When they finished, the air felt lighter. Not cleansed, not healed, but lighter. Later, Thomas sat outside alone, watching the sun draw long shadows across the hills. His hands rested in his lap, but his eyes never stopped scanning. Sarah joined him after putting Leah down for a nap. She sat on the steps, her arms wrapped around her knees. "I keep waiting for the guilt," she said, "for the regret. You won't find it here." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. He said he'd come back for her. Every time I tried to leave, he'd say it again. that I'd never see her again, that I was worthless. Thomas didn't interrupt. I almost believed it. I know. I was going to wait until she turned 10. That was my plan. I thought maybe then I'd be strong enough. You were strong the day you left. Sarah blinked, and for the first time, tears fell freely. I didn't run because I was brave. I ran because I was scared he'd start looking at her the way he used to look at me. Thomas clenched his fists. She wiped her face, angry now. I should have left sooner. I should have fought. You fought, Thomas said. Every day you stayed alive. Every breath you gave her was a rebellion. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need fixing. When the light faded, Sarah spoke again. Why did you really let us in that night? Tomas looked toward the window where Leia's silhouette rested on the curtain. Because I've lived with the sound of a door I didn't open, and I won't do it again. She turned toward him. You had a family. He nodded. Your son, he was Leia's age. He nodded again, slower this time. What happened? Fire, he said. I was scouting up north, 3 days out, came back to ashes. Sarah's hand moved to her mouth. I told myself it was God's will, that maybe they never felt it. But that's a lie I sleep beside. Her hand found his, rested there. I'm sorry, I am too. They didn't speak after that. They just sat. In the cabin, Leia stirred but didn't wake. The fire kept burning. That night, Thomas walked the perimeter twice. The stars hung heavy above the basin, the moon sharp enough to draw shadows in the dirt. He listened for hoofbeats, for whispers, for anything that didn't belong. But the land was quiet. And in that quiet, something else began to settle. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. The knock came just after sunrise. It wasn't loud, just 3 short raps against the wood firm deliberate. Tomas was already awake, nursing coffee at the kitchen table. Sarah was still upstairs, and Leia's soft breathing drifted down through the floorboards. He hadn't expected trouble so soon, but his hand went to the rifle anyway. Some ghosts don't come at night, Thomas muttered. They come dressed in daylight, wearing your brother's eyes. He opened the door slowly, the barrel hidden behind his thigh. Cole Tanner stood on the porch, coat dusted and frost hat, low boots worn smooth. He wasn't like Wade. No curling smirk, no twitchy hands. His face was lined with sorrow, not malice, but the blood was still the same. I ain't come for revenge, Cole said before Thomas could speak. Not looking to dig up graves or right what can't be undone. Then what are you looking for, my niece? Cole said simply. And the truth. Behind him a mule grazed near the fence. His saddlebags bulged with supplies, as if he planned to stay a while. Thomas didn't lower the rifle. You shouldn't be here. I reckon you're right, Cole said, but I got nowhere else to be. Wade's dead. I know. You come to pick up where he left off, Mo. I came to finish what I should have started years ago. Thomas studied him, eyes narrowing. You helped him. I enabled him, Cole said. Then I left, thought I was saving myself. Turns out I was just making room for the devil to grow. Inside, a floorboard creaked, Sarah awake, now listening. Thomas stepped out, closed the door behind him. Why now? Cole looked toward the horizon. Because ghosts started riding my dreams. Because there's a girl out here with my brother's blood, and maybe if I do right by her, I'll start sleeping again. Thomas considered that. Sarah won't want to see you. Then I'll leave, Cole said. But if she'll talk even for a minute, I'll stay out by the barn. No threats, no pushing. Just hoping. Thomas said nothing for a long while. Then he nodded once and pointed toward the barn. You pitch camp there. No closer. Cole tipped his hat and led the mule away. When Tomas returned inside, Sarah was sitting on the bottom stair, arms crossed tight. I heard, she said. I didn't invite him. He came on his own. He was there, Thomas. Not just in the background. He was the one who signed the papers, who smiled when Wade cornered me. He sat at that dinner table and called me lucky. Thomas sat beside her. He says he's changed. Maybe he has. But you can't change what happened. No, Thomas agreed. But sometimes you can heal around it. She stared at the floor. He knows about Leia. He says he wants to make things right. Why now? Because ghosts don't stay buried. That afternoon, Sarah walked out to the barn. Cole stood near the open door, splitting kindling. He didn't move when she approached, just set the axe aside and wiped his hands on his coat. You've got nerve, she said. I lost it a long time ago, he replied. What's left is guilt. Why are you really here? I was wrong, he said simply. Back then, I thought what Wade did was just the way of things. Men get angry, women keep quiet. I thought you were exaggerating. You let him. I did, he said, voice hollow, and I've regretted it every day since. Sarah folded her arms, jaw tight. You can't undo it. Not with apologies. Not with firewood. I know, Cole said, but maybe I can give her a piece of family that ain't poisoned. She stared at him, searching for the lie, but found only weariness. She doesn't know you. Then maybe she can know me, not who I was. Sarah turned to leave, then paused. 1 hour. You sit with her once. She decides. Cole nodded, quiet. The meeting happened in the grove behind the house. Thomas watched from the porch, rifle within reach, but unnecessary. Leia sat on a log leg, swinging, while Cole knelt in front of her with a carved wooden horse in his hands. You look just like your mama, he said. Strong eyes. Why are you here? She asked bluntly. Because I missed a lot of chances to do right. Thought maybe I'd start with you. She took the horse, turning it in her hands. I already have a horse. He smiled. Then now you've got two. This one don't eat much. She smiled barely. They sat for a while, talking about horses and stars and coyotes. Sarah stayed near but didn't interrupt. Later that evening, after the sun dipped low, Cole packed up to leave. I ain't staying, he told Thomas. Don't want to make her choose. Thomas tilted his head. And what about your ghosts? They're quieter now, Cole said. Not gone, just quieter. Before he mounted up, he turned to Sarah. If you ever want someone to help teach her how to rope or ride fence, someone who listens more than he talks, well, I'll be around. She didn't reply, but she nodded. That night, as stars crowded the sky, Sarah stood outside the cabin, arms folded across her chest. He's not Wade, she said quietly. No, Thomas agreed. But he carries the shadow. I think Leia saw that, and chose light anyway. Thomas looked toward the barn, empty now. She's stronger than we were. Sarah smiled, faint and wistful. Then maybe we did something right. The wind picked up, rustling the brush, carrying with it the scent of cedar and dust and something older. Inside, Leia was humming softly to the new wooden horse, placing it beside the old one on the shelf. Thomas watched the horizon, heart still guarded but softening. Some men came to claim, others came to repair, and sometimes the land gave back a second chance, not to erase but to redeem. Just before they turned in, Sarah said she asked if she could visit him. Thomas paused. And what did you say? I said yes. Once. With me. He nodded. That's enough. They stood together in the doorway, the fire inside casting warm light behind them. The world outside was still uncertain, but here for now there was something close to peace, and the ghosts for once kept their distance. The wind howled through the canyon that night, rattling the barn doors and sweeping dust against the windows. Leah curled beneath the quilt Sarah had sewn from scraps, her little hand tucked beneath her cheek. But Thomas couldn't sleep. He stared out the window, jaw tight, a coil of unease twisting in his gut like a snake waiting to strike. They'd had 4 days of calm. 4 whole days where Leah laughed out loud, where Sarah smiled at the horizon without flinching, and where the silence between them was soft, not sharp. But peace in these parts never stayed long, especially not when trouble rode the same roads as secrets. Just after midnight, he heard it hooves on gravel. Not one, not two, but many. He slipped on his boots, grabbed the rifle from above the hearth, and stepped outside the cold, hitting his lungs like a slap. 7 men rode into the yard shadows in the moonlight. The lead rider dismounted with a kind of ease Thomas recognized someone used to getting what he wanted without asking. His coat was fine, dark wool with silver buttons, and the glint of a gold pocket watch swung from his chest. "Evening," the man said smoothly. "Name's Franklin Harper. I believe you've got something that belongs to me." Thomas didn't lower the rifle. "Only thing on this land that's mine is earned. You might want to turn around." Franklin chuckled. "Oh, I'm not talking about cattle or property, Mr. Navajo. I'm talking about that little girl in your house. The one my dear cousin Wade forgot to mention in his will." Thomas didn't flinch, but his heart skipped. "You knew Wade knew him. We drank from the same well as boys. He owed me debts. Favors. Said he'd be sending me something that'd square us." "She's not a something," Thomas said coldly. Franklin's smile tightened. "Doesn't matter what you call her. My cousin was clear. I got the papers, and I intend to collect." Inside the house, Sarah was already at the window, eyes wide. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. Franklin's men were shifting now, resting hands on holsters. Thomas clocked them. 3 had sidearms, 1 had a rifle. The others looked like they just liked trouble. "You show me those papers," Thomas said. "Then we'll talk." "I'd rather just take what's mine," Franklin said, stepping forward. Thomas cocked the rifle. That stopped them cold. "You're not walking off this land with her," Thomas said. "You want to test that theory, go ahead." Franklin's eyes narrowed. "You can't hold off all of us." "I don't have to," Thomas said. "But I'll make sure you don't leave with your teeth." For a long moment nothing moved but the wind. Then Franklin raised his hands. "All right. No need to die over a child. I'll be back. With law. With writs. We'll do this proper." Thomas didn't answer. The men turned and rode off, dust kicking up behind them like a ghost herd. Inside, Sarah was already gathering bags. "He's not bluffing," she said. "You saw his face." Thomas nodded. "He'll come back. Legal or not, we can't run forever." "No," Thomas said, "but we don't have to." She looked at him. "I'm going to Black Rock," Thomas said. "To the tribal court, to Judge Yazzie. If anyone can make this right on paper, it's her." Sarah hesitated. "You think she'll help? She knows our family. She knew my father. If we can prove Wade's claim was fraudulent or coerced." "Do we have enough time?" Thomas looked to Leah, who had wandered downstairs, rubbing her eyes. "I don't know," he said, "but I have to try." Black Rock was a 4-hour ride on good roads. Thomas took the truck and left before dawn, legal papers and old family records bundled in the passenger seat. The hills passed by in shadows, rising like sleeping giants as he pushed west toward the courthouse, sitting on the edge of the high desert. Judge Yazzie was an older woman with storm-colored braids and eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. "You're asking me to overrule a federal claim," she said after Thomas laid out everything: Wade's abuse, Sarah's escape, Franklin's threats. "I'm asking you to see the truth," Thomas said. "This girl, she's Navajo. She was born on this land. She belongs with her mother." Judge Yazzie tapped her pen. "Wade's estate is murky. He had assets under multiple names, but the child wasn't listed in his legal will. That's the only reason this Harper man thinks he has a claim. Because she's worth money, Thomas said bitterly. Yazie's eyes darkened. Everything always is, but family, real family, isn't bought. I'll issue a stay. He won't be able to take her until the case is reviewed in tribal court. Thomas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. But that won't stop him from trying, Yazie warned. If he's desperate, he'll bend the law. I've faced worse. I know she said signing the document, but keep her close and watch the shadows. Back at the homestead, Sarah was teaching Leah how to braid rope when Thomas returned. She saw the papers before he spoke and nodded. So we have a shield, for now. They sat around the fire that night close together. Thomas shared what the judge had said, and they made a plan. If Franklin returned, they would stall. Delay. Call in every favor and friend they had left. But the quiet that night was uneasy, like the land was holding its breath. Sarah looked to the sky where clouds gathered. You think we'll ever be free from men like him? Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I don't know, he said, but as long as we've got each other, they'll never own us. And behind them, Leah placed the two wooden horses side by side on the hearth, one from her mother, one from her uncle, a bridge between pain and healing. She whispered to the fire, "They don't get to take me. Not anymore." The sun had just begun to rise, casting long gold streaks across the scrubland, when Tomas saw the dust cloud on the horizon. He didn't need binoculars to know what it meant. Trucks. 3 of them, big ones, moving fast, heading straight for the ranch. Sarah stood behind him on the porch, arms folded across her chest, trying to stay steady. Leah clutched her leg eyes wide, sensing the tension in the air like a dog before a storm. They came early, Sarah whispered. They never left, Thomas replied. They just waited until the papers didn't scare them anymore. He turned to her, voice low. You remember what we talked about? Sarah nodded. Back trail through the canyon, mules saddled. Leah's things are packed. He crouched and looked into Leah's face. You remember how we practiced? She nodded, lip trembling. Stay quiet. Stay low. Don't come out unless Mama says. Thomas kissed her forehead. Good girl. Then he rose, grabbed the rifle from the door, and walked down the porch steps. Franklin Harper was standing in the lead truck bed coat, flapping in the wind hat low over his eyes. Behind him, men stepped out with pistols and shotguns, the kind that didn't come for negotiation. Franklin jumped down and sauntered forward like he owned the world. Mr. Navajo, I tried the legal route. Papers or not, that girl was promised to my family. I aim to collect today. You've got no authority here, Thomas said. This land is sovereign. You bring lawmen, not hired guns, and we'll talk. Franklin sneered. The law's just paper out here. Bullets get things done quicker. Thomas raised the rifle. You don't want to do this. You think you scare me, Franklin barked. You're just a dirt farmer with a past full of ghosts. Tomas stepped forward, barrel pointed square at Franklin's chest. Those ghosts built this land, and they'll bury anyone who tries to steal from it. Stand down, Franklin yelled, waving to his men. The guns came up, and then from behind the barn came the sharp echo of a single warning shot. All heads turned. From the tree line emerged Maggie and Bear, riding hard rifles in hand, joined by 4 more riders from the village, including Judge Yazie herself, wrapped in a wind-stiff robe, her gray braid trailing like a banner. You're trespassing, Yazie called out. You and your men are armed, outnumbered, and violating federal and tribal jurisdiction. Leave now or face consequences. Franklin laughed bitterly. You brought a judge to a gunfight, I brought the truth, she said, and a witness. From behind her horse stepped a young man in a denim jacket, wide-eyed, skinny, a little wild. Is that Thomas? Squinted. It's Levi, Maggie said. Wade's former stable boy. He came forward. Levi raised his voice. Wade lied. About everything. He promised that girl to Franklin in a deal for money, told me to forge signatures, said no one would care what happened to a half-Navajo child. The air changed. Franklin's face paled, jaw clenched. He's lying. That boy's a runaway. Judge Yazzie raised her phone. He's been recorded, sworn testimony. This case is over, Harper. But Franklin wasn't done. In one sudden movement, he drew a pistol and aimed it straight at Thomas. Before Thomas could react, Sarah stepped into view, shotgun leveled, unwavering. You shoot my husband, she said, voice shaking but firm, and I swear I'll put you in the dirt. Franklin hesitated. Then Bear moved fast as a thunderclap. He tackled Franklin from behind the gun, clattering to the dirt. The men scrambled, but with Yazzie's team encircling them and Thomas's people flanking from the east, they knew they'd lost. Franklin was hauled up, wrists bound with Maggie's braided cord. You'll pay for this, he spat. I already have, Thomas said, staring him down. But it's her turn to live free. He nodded toward the house where Leah stood on the porch. Sarah behind her, the child's eyes locked on him, trusting safe. Franklin's trucks turned around, engines sputtering, taking the rest of the defeated men with them. They left behind dust, shame, and the echo of failure. That night, the kitchen was warm with the scent of cornbread and stew. Bear and Maggie stayed late, laughter mingling with the firelight. Tomas sat at the table, Leah curled in his lap. She traced the stitching on his shirt with small fingers. Is he gone forever? She asked. Thomas glanced at Sarah, who smiled gently. Men like him always find new ways to stir trouble, he said. But this time we're ready, and next time you won't be alone. She nodded sleepily. Sarah rose and brought over a folded paper, Judge Yazzie's order finalized that afternoon, declaring Leah officially under Thomas and Sarah's guardianship. A seal stamped in crimson confirmed what they already felt in their hearts. She's ours, Sarah whispered, hand on Thomas's shoulder. No, Thomas corrected, voice low and full. We're hers. Outside, the wind had calmed. The stars glimmered with the hush of something sacred, something whole. But in the distance, on the far edge of their land, headlights blinked, once then disappeared. The road was never empty for long, and they all knew in their bones that the past didn't end. It just changed its shape. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the mesa in a hush that softened everything it touched. The cattle had already been brought down to the lower pastures, the fences mended, and the firewood stacked tall outside the house. Tomas stood outside the barn with a leather halter in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, watching as the morning sun spilled gold across the drifts. Inside, Leah giggled while brushing Daisy, the mare she'd once been too scared to ride. Now she moved around the animal like she'd been born in a saddle, her hands sure, her eyes bright. Sarah watched from the tack room door, arms crossed, heart full. She's different now, she said softly to Thomas, stepping outside. He nodded. Stronger. She's safe. Thomas glanced toward the road. For now. Sarah followed his gaze. Still worrying. He shrugged. It's a habit. She leaned into him. Then break it. We're here. We're whole. He set down the coffee and pulled her close. Sometimes I forget we made it. You didn't forget. You just fought so hard it still feels like you're bracing for the blow. The barn doors opened, and Leah burst out, cheeks flushed pink. Mama, Papa, Daisy needs new hay. Sarah smiled. Then come help carry it, little boss lady. The morning passed in chores and laughter. Bear stopped by with his cousin bringing salted venison and stories about a coyote he swore wore a scarf. Maggie arrived just before noon with cinnamon bread and a new book for Leia. They all sat together at the long table near the fireplace. Leia perched between Bear and Maggie, sharing buttered slices and belly laughs. It felt like family. It was family. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. Firm. Unfamiliar. Thomas opened the door to find a man in a clean tan jacket, clipboard and hand badge on his chest. "Mr. Yazzie," the man said. "Name's Agent Royce. Department of the Interior. May I have a moment?" Sarah stood instantly alert. Thomas stepped outside with the agent shutting the door behind him. "What's this about?" he asked. Guarded. Royce adjusted his stance gaze, scanning the horizon. "It's regarding Franklin Harper." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I thought he was dealt with." "He was," Royce said. "But he's filed a countersuit, civil, not criminal. He claims the land transfer to you was under false pretenses and that you threatened him with violence." Thomas barked a laugh. "He showed up with a militia. I read the reports and the tribal court rulings. But this time he's coming at it from the angle of federal land rights. Claims your property line encroaches on contested grazing zones." Tomas narrowed his eyes. "This has nothing to do with land. He's trying to take her back again." Royce hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe he just wants to ruin you slowly." "What do you want?" "I want the truth. I've been following your case quietly for months. What you did taking in Leia, protecting her from Wade and Franklin, it's something we don't see enough. But the system doesn't care much for truth. It cares about paper." Thomas crossed his arms. "So what now?" Royce handed him a sealed envelope. "You'll be summoned to a federal hearing in Santa Fe. You'll need representation and proof of every word. I've got witnesses." "You'll need more than that," Royce said. "You'll need to show who she is, who you are. Not just in records, but in history." Thomas exhaled slowly, the cold air turning his breath to fog. "Then we'll bring everything." Royce nodded once. "I believe you." Back inside, Thomas placed the envelope on the table. Sarah read it, then looked up. "He's not done with us." "No," Thomas said, "but we're not who we were when this started." Maggie set down her cup. "Then let's build your defense. Tribal history, land deeds, witnesses, oral accounts. We'll bring the whole weight of this place." Bear added, "And if the court wants proof of what kind of people you are, I'll testify first. You gave that girl something no one else would." Leia looked up. Love, everyone paused. Tomas reached across the table and took her hand. "Yes, baby girl. Love and a future." In the days that followed, the house transformed into a war room. Judge Yazzie arrived with boxes of archived documents and maps. Elder Ben brought stories, oral traditions passed down from the dinee, the kind of truth deeper than paper. Sarah recorded everything. Maggie organized files. Bear helped Thomas build a presentation board that could be transported by truck. Leia watched it all with curious eyes, sensing this was bigger than she could understand. One evening, she asked Sarah, "If the court says I can't stay, do I have to go?" Sarah knelt before her. "No one decides that but us. You are our daughter. We'll fight for you." "But what if they don't believe?" Thomas crouched beside them. "Then we make them see." On the morning of the hearing, snow still clung to the edges of the world. The family loaded into Bear's old truck, Leia bundled in a thick blue coat, her fingers wrapped around a small carved horse Thomas had made for her. The courtroom in Santa Fe was cold, formal, and echoing with tension. Franklin sat smugly across the aisle, flanked by suited lawyers. His smile faltered the moment he saw the tribe's full presence behind Thomas, elders, leaders, community members who had driven hours to be there. The judge called for testimony. Bear went first, rough-voiced and firm. "I've known Thomas since we were boys. He's stubborn, sure, but he's good. That girl wouldn't be breathing free air if it weren't for him." Then Maggie Franklin Harper saw Leah as property. Tomas saw her as family. Then Yazzie, citing land agreements, tribal sovereignty, and the cultural implications of guardianship. Tomas took the stand last. His voice shook at first, then steadied. "I was raised to believe we inherit more than land. We inherit duty. Leah came to me broken, afraid. But she taught me how to live again. I didn't save her. She saved me." He looked straight at the judge. "I'm not asking for permission to be her father. I already am." Then, quiet as snowfall, Leah stood up, walked to the bench, and offered the carved horse. "My papa made this for me," she said, "so I'd always have something strong to hold." The courtroom went still, and the judge smiled, ruling in favor of Thomas and Sarah Yazzie. They drove home under a violet sky, headlights carving through dusk. No one spoke for a long time. Then Leah whispered from the back seat, "Are we really free now?" Thomas met Sarah's eyes in the rearview mirror. Her hand found his. "Yes, baby girl," she said. "We're really free." The educational lesson learned from this story is that family is not defined solely by blood, but by love, protection, and shared purpose. In a world where legal systems and personal pasts can threaten our most sacred bonds, it is often the strength of community and the quiet resilience of the heart that prevails. True guardianship is proven not just through paperwork, but through daily acts of compassion and courage. For older generations, this story gently reminds us that it's never too late to stand up for what's right, and that sometimes the greatest legacy we leave is the shelter we offer others when the world has turned them away.